The storm had been building all day, and by nightfall it turned the mountains into a place of chaos. Thunder shook the walls of the small cabin, and lightning split the sky every few seconds. Danny Cole sat by his window and watched the rain come down in sheets. He had lived alone in these Montana mountains for 3 years now, and he had seen plenty of bad weather. But something about this night felt different. Something felt wrong. Danny was 32 years old, with tired eyes and hands that still remembered how to save lives. He had been a combat medic once, serving in places where death came fast and often. He had been good at his job. He had saved many soldiers, but he had also lost his entire squad in an accident that still visited him in nightmares. After that, he left the military and came here to hide from the world. Now he worked as a wildlife veterinarian, treating injured animals and avoiding human contact as much as possible. The lightning flashed again, and this time Danny saw something strange through the rain. A light in the sky, moving too fast and too low. It was not a plane. It was not a helicopter. It streaked across the darkness and then disappeared behind the tree line with a terrible crashing sound that he could hear even over the thunder. Danny grabbed his jacket and his medical bag. He did not think about what he was doing. He just moved. That was how he had always been. When something was hurt, he went to help. It was the one part of himself he could not turn off no matter how hard he tried. The forest was dark and wet, and the wind tried to push him back with every step. But Danny kept moving toward the crash site. It took him 20 minutes to find it, and when he did, he stopped breathing for a moment. The ship was like nothing he had ever seen. It was made of dark metal that seemed to drink in the light from his flashlight. It was maybe 50 feet long, shaped like a curved blade, and it had torn a path of destruction through the trees before coming to rest against a boulder. Smoke rose from cracks in its hull. 3 years ago, humanity had made first contact with the Galactic Union. Danny had watched the news like everyone else. He knew that aliens existed. He knew that dozens of species traveled between the stars, but knowing something and seeing it were very different things. He approached the ship slowly. A section of the hull had been torn open, and he could see movement inside. Something was alive in there, something big. Danny climbed through the opening and found himself in a corridor lit by flickering emergency lights. The air smelled like copper and something else he could not name. He followed the corridor until he reached what looked like a cockpit, and there he found her. She was a giant. That was the only word that fit. She lay crumpled against the far wall, her body too large for the space she was in. Danny guessed she was over 30 feet tall when standing, with pale blue skin and features that were almost human but not quite. Her eyes were closed, and her silver hair was matted with blood. She wore armor that had been torn and burned in several places, and beneath that armor Danny could see wounds, many wounds. He knew what she was. He had read about them in the news reports. They were a race of giants known throughout the galaxy as the greatest warriors alive. Other species feared them, some them. They had conquered dozens of worlds and were said to be nearly impossible to kill. But this one was dying. Danny could see that clearly. Whatever had happened to her, whatever fight she had been in, it had left her broken and bleeding. His hands moved before his mind could catch up. He climbed over debris and got close to her, examining her wounds. She had deep cuts across her torso, burns on her arms, and what looked like a stab wound in her side. The bleeding was severe. Without help, she would be dead within the hour. Danny opened his medical bag. He had supplies for treating large animals, bears, elk, horses. Nothing this big, but the basics were the same. Stop the bleeding, clean the wounds, keep the patient alive long enough for their body to do the rest. He worked through the night. The storm raged outside, but inside the crashed ship, Danny focused only on his patient. He used all his bandages, all his sutures, all his antibiotics. He adapted techniques he had learned in the military and things he had figured out treating wounded wolves. He talked to her as he worked, even though she could not hear him. It was an old habit from his medic days. Talking to patients kept him calm. By dawn, the storm had passed and Danny had done everything he could. The giant woman was still alive, but barely. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin had turned a lighter shade of blue that he guessed was not a good sign. He needed to get her somewhere safe and warm. He needed to keep treating her wounds. Getting her to his cabin was impossible. She was far too large. So Danny did the next best thing. He brought his cabin to her. He drove his truck back and forth, carrying blankets, heaters, medicine, food, and water. He set up a shelter around the crashed ship using tarps and rope. He turned the wreckage into a makeshift hospital. On the second day, she opened her eyes. Danny was changing her bandages when he saw her looking at him. Her eyes were gold, like liquid metal, and they were filled with confusion. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a broken whisper. "You should run," she said in English that was rough but understandable. "Death is coming for me. They will kill anyone near me." Danny kept working on her bandages. "I do not abandon patients," he said simply. She stared at him like he had spoken nonsense. You are human. Why would you help me?" Danny finished the bandage and looked up at her. "Because you needed help. That is reason enough." The giant woman held his gaze for a long moment. He could see that she was trying to understand him, trying to fit him into some category that made sense. But she could not. He was something she had never encountered before. "You are strange," she whispered. "You are very strange, little human." Then her eyes closed and she slipped back into unconsciousness. Danny checked her pulse and found it stronger than before. She was fighting. She wanted to live. That was good. That was something he could work with. He sat back against the wall of the ship and let out a long breath. He did not know who was hunting her. He did not know what kind of danger he had brought into his life. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, he had a patient who needed him. And Danny Cole did not let his patients die if he could help it. Outside, the sun rose over the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, ships were already tracking the signal from the crash. The hunt was beginning, but Danny did not know that yet. All he knew was that he had made a choice, and he would see it through to the end. 3 days passed, and Danny barely slept at all. He spent every hour caring for his patient, checking her wounds, changing her bandages, and making sure she stayed hydrated. He drove his truck into town twice to buy more supplies, telling the curious shopkeepers that he had found a wounded bear in the forest. They believed him because Danny had a reputation for caring about animals that others would leave to die. The giant woman drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she was awake for a few minutes, staring at Danny with those golden eyes as he worked. Other times she slept for hours, her massive chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. But even in her sleep, she was not peaceful. She spoke in her fevered dreams, words in a language Danny did not understand. Her voice was filled with pain and anger and something that sounded like regret. Danny had set up his tablet near her head to record her words. The device had translation software that could handle most Galactic Union languages, and slowly it began to piece together what she was saying. By the second night, Danny had learned her name. By the third day, he understood her story. She had been a commander in the military, one of the highest ranks a warrior could achieve. She had served her people for 40 years, fighting in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy. She had been decorated with honors. She had been respected by her soldiers. She had been everything a was supposed to be. Then came the order that changed everything. The translation software was not perfect, but Danny got the basic picture. Had been commanded to execute 2,000 prisoners after a battle. They were not soldiers. They were civilians. Farmers, traders, families who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Among them were children. Refused the order. When her superiors insisted, she did something that no commander had done in centuries. She helped the prisoners escape. She opened the gates of the prison camp and led them to safety herself. And for that crime, her own soldiers turned on her. The wounds Danny was treating had come from blades. On the fourth day, finally woke up fully. Her eyes were clear and her voice was strong when she spoke. "You are still here," she said, looking down at Danny with an expression he could not read. "Where else would I be?" Danny replied. He was sitting on a crate near her head, eating a sandwich he had brought from the cabin. "Dead, running, anywhere but here." She shifted her massive body, wincing as the movement pulled at her wounds. "You do not understand what you have done, little human. You do not understand what is coming." Danny set down his sandwich. "Then tell me." Was quiet for a long moment. Then she began to speak, and this time there was no fever to soften her words. She told him about the high command. She told him about their strict code of honor and their ruthless punishment for those who broke it. She told him that refusing an order was punishable by death, and that helping enemies escape was considered the greatest betrayal possible. "They have sent hunter squads to find me," she said. "The best warriors my people have. They will track me across the galaxy. They will not stop until I am dead." "Why do they want you dead so badly?" Danny asked. "You refused one order, that seems extreme." Let out a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "Because I know what they did. I know about the executions they have ordered, the worlds they have burned, the crimes they have hidden from the Galactic Union. If I live, I can testify against them. I can bring them down." Danny nodded slowly. Now he understood. This was not just about punishment. This was about silencing a witness. "How long do we have?" he asked. His golden eyes widened. "We. There is no we in this, human. This is my fight. You need to leave now before they arrive." Danny stood up and stretched his back. 3 days of sleeping on the floor had left him stiff and sore. "Can you stand?" "What?" "Can you stand up right now? Can you walk? Can you run?" Tried to push herself up and her arms shook with the effort. She fell back with a grunt of pain. "No," she admitted. "Not yet." "Then I am not going anywhere." Danny picked up his medical bag and started checking his supplies. "If you cannot run, then running is not an option. We will have to fight." Stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You cannot fight you are human. You are small and weak and fragile. They will crush you like an insect." Danny smiled, and there was something dark in that smile. "I have been underestimated before. It usually works out in my favor." He left the ship and walked back to his cabin. He had work to do. The forest around his home was full of natural choke points, places where large creatures would have trouble moving. He knew every rock, every tree, every stream. He had spent 3 years learning this land. Now he was going to use it. Over the next 2 days, Danny set traps. He used techniques he had learned in the military combined with tricks he had developed for catching dangerous animals. He dug pit traps and covered them with branches. He set up trip wires connected to explosives he made from supplies in his shed. He positioned fallen trees to create barriers and dead ends. Watched him through the window of the crashed ship. She did not understand this human. In culture, the weak were abandoned. No one risked their life for a stranger. No one stood against impossible odds for someone they had just met. Yet here was this tiny creature, this fragile being who barely came up to her knee, preparing to fight warriors who had conquered worlds. "Why?" she asked him on the evening before the hunters arrived. "Why are you doing this?" Danny paused in his work and looked at her. "Because you made the right choice when it mattered. You could have followed your orders and been safe. Instead, you saved 2,000 innocent lives. That is worth protecting." "You will die," said, "you know that." Danny shrugged. "Maybe, but not today and not without a fight." He went back to his work, leaving alone with her thoughts. She had lived for over 100 years. She had seen countless acts of courage and cowardice, but she had never seen anything like this small human who refused to abandon her even when death was certain. That night detected communication signals on the crashed ship's damaged sensors. The hunter squad was close. They would arrive by morning. She told Danny, expecting him to finally see reason and flee. Instead, he just nodded and said, "Then we had better get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Watched him walk back to his cabin, and for the first time in her long life, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt hope. They came at dawn, 6 warriors descending from the sky in a ship that made no sound. Danny watched them from his position in the trees, hidden behind a boulder with a clear view of the clearing. They were massive, each one standing over 30 feet tall, their blue skin covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb the morning light. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known fear. Leading them was a warrior even larger than the others, with scars across his face and cold black eyes. Danny recognized him from fever dreams. This was Thane, her former second-in-command, the one who had betrayed her, the one who had led the attack that nearly killed her. Thane raised his hand, and the squad stopped at the edge of the forest. He looked around the clearing, studying the terrain with the eyes of someone who had fought 1,000 battles. Then he smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. He called out, his voice carrying across the mountain. "We know you are here. Your ship's beacon led us straight to you. Come out and face your punishment like a true, or hide like the coward you have become. Either way, you die today." There was no response from the crashed ship. Danny had moved during the night, hiding her in a cave half a mile away. She was too weak to fight and too proud to admit it. Moving her had taken hours and left Danny exhausted, but it was necessary. The crashed ship was a trap now, nothing more. Thane gestured to his warriors and they began moving into the forest. They spread out in a standard search pattern, covering ground quickly despite the dense trees. Danny counted them as they passed his position. 6 total, including Thane. Not good odds, but he had faced worse. The first trap triggered when a warrior stepped into a covered pit. The ground gave way beneath his massive feet, and he fell 15 feet into a hole lined with sharpened stakes. The stakes were not big enough to kill him, but they were enough to wound his legs and trap him in place. His roar of pain and anger echoed through the forest. Danny was already moving. He had positioned himself along a ridge that overlooked the main approach to his cabin. From here, he could see 3 of the warriors converging on their fallen comrade. He raised the rifle he had modified over the past 2 days. It was designed to fire tranquilizer darts meant for elephants. He had loaded it with the strongest sedative he had. The dart hit the second warrior in the neck, right in the gap between his helmet and his armor. The turned, confused, reaching up to pull out the small projectile. Danny fired again, hitting him in the same spot. And again. By the 4th dart, the warrior was staggering. By the 6th, he was on his knees. By the 8th, he was unconscious. The other warriors had spotted Danny's position now. They charged toward the ridge, crashing through trees like they were made of paper. Danny ran. He was faster than them in the dense forest, his small body sliding through gaps that their massive forms could not follow. He led them toward his second line of traps. A trip wire caught the 3rd warrior across the shins, and the explosive it triggered was not meant to kill. It was meant to blind. The flash and smoke filled the air, and the warrior stumbled into a ravine, tumbling down the steep slope and crashing into the rocks below. He was not dead, but he was not getting up anytime soon either. Thane's voice cut through the chaos. "Spread out, find the human. He is just one small creature. Do not let him make fools of us." But Danny was already making fools of them. He knew this forest like he knew his own hands. He had walked every trail, climbed every tree, crossed every stream. They were powerful, but they were strangers here. They did not know where the ground was soft, where the branches were weak, where a wrong step could send them sliding down a hillside. The 4th warrior chased Danny toward a cliff edge, never seeing the trap until it was too late. Danny had weakened the ground there over 2 days, digging channels beneath the surface and filling them with loose soil. When the warrior's weight hit that section, the entire edge gave way. He fell 30 feet into the river below. The impact would not kill him, but the current was strong, and by the time he pulled himself out, the fight would be over one way or another. 2 warriors left plus Thane. Danny was running low on tricks. Inside the cave, listened to the sounds of battle through a small communication device Danny had given her. She heard explosions and shouts and the crash of falling trees. She heard Danny breathing hard as he ran through the forest, staying one step ahead of creatures 10 times his size. She heard him fighting her war because she was too weak to fight it herself. In all her years as a warrior, had never felt so helpless. She had also never felt so amazed. This human was doing the impossible. He was holding off hunters with nothing but traps and cleverness and a stubborn refusal to die. Danny's luck ran out near the cabin. He had circled back, hopping to lead the remaining warriors into his final trap. But Thane was smarter than his soldiers. He had anticipated Danny's movements, and he was waiting. The massive hand came out of nowhere, grabbing Danny and lifting him off the ground. Thane held him at eye level, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting insect. "You are the one causing all this trouble," Thane asked. "This tiny thing." Danny struggled against the grip, but it was like fighting stone. He could not move at all. "You have killed 4 of my warriors," Thane continued. His voice was calm, almost impressed. 4 hunters defeated by a human. If I did not see it myself, I would not believe it. "They are not dead," Danny managed to say. "Just sleeping." Thane laughed. A merciful enemy, how precious, how very human. His grip tightened and Danny felt his ribs creak under the pressure. But mercy is weakness, little creature, and weakness must be crushed. Then a shadow fell over them both, blocking out the sun. Thane turned and his eyes went wide. Stood behind them. She had dragged herself from the cave, crawled through the forest, and pulled herself upright using the trees for support. She was shaking with the effort. Blood was seeping through her bandages. But she was standing, and in her hand was a weapon she had taken from the fallen warrior in the pit. "Release him," she said. Her voice was cold as winter. Thane smiled. "You can barely stand. What do you think you can do?" Raised the weapon. "I only need to stand long enough to kill you." The forest went silent. Danny hung in Thane's grip, watching 2 giants face each other across a clearing filled with destruction. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Thane threw Danny aside like a piece of garbage, and the real battle began. Danny hit the ground hard and felt something crack in his chest. The pain was sharp and immediate, but he had felt worse. He rolled onto his side and watched as and Thane circled each other in the clearing. They were both giants, but the difference between them was clear. Thane was fresh and uninjured, his armor unmarked, and his stance confident. Was wounded and exhausted, her bandages soaked with blood and her legs trembling with every step. Any reasonable observer would have said the fight was already over. But was not fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the small human who had saved her life and then risked his own to protect her. She was fighting for the first person in 40 years who had shown her true honor, and that made her dangerous in a way that Thane did not understand. They clashed in the center of the clearing, and the impact shook the earth. Danny felt the vibration through the ground as he crawled toward the tree line. He needed to get clear of the battle. 2 giants fighting at full strength could crush him without even noticing. Thane attacked with precision, his blade cutting arcs through the air that would have killed any normal opponent, but knew his fighting style. She had trained him herself decades ago. She blocked his strikes and countered with moves he had never seen, techniques she had kept secret even from her closest soldiers. "You should have died on that transport," Thane growled as their weapons locked together. "You should have accepted your punishment like a proper." "I stopped being a proper the day I chose to save innocent lives instead of taking them," replied. She pushed him back and swung for his head. He ducked, barely. The battle raged across the clearing and into the forest. Trees fell like matchsticks as the giants crashed through them. The ground was torn up by their footsteps, leaving craters in the soft earth. Danny watched from behind a boulder, holding his cracked ribs and trying to breathe through the pain. Was holding her own, but Danny could see she was fatting. Every movement cost her strength she did not have. Her wounds had reopened and blood was flowing freely down her side. She was fighting on willpower alone, and willpower could only last so long. Thane saw it too. He pressed his advantage, attacking faster and harder, forcing to defend without time to counter. His blade caught her arm, then her leg, then her shoulder. None of the wounds were deep, but each one took something from her. "You were the greatest commander our people had seen in centuries," Thane said as he drove her back toward the cliff edge. "You could have been legend. Instead, you threw it all away for worthless prisoners." Stumbled, her wounded leg giving out beneath her. She fell to one knee, barely raising her weapon in time to block Thane's next strike. "They were not worthless," she said through gritted teeth. "They were people, innocent people, something you have forgotten how to see." Thane laughed and kicked her weapon from her hands. It spun away across the ground, landing 20 feet from where Danny was hiding. Tried to rise, but Thane planted his foot on her chest and forced her down. "Look at you," he said. "The mighty brought low by sentiment, and for what? A handful of aliens who probably died anyway, a human who will be dead in minutes." He raised his blade. "The High Command sends their regards." Danny moved. He did not think about the pain in his ribs or the fact that he was about to attack a 30-foot warrior with nothing but desperation. He just moved. His hands found fallen weapon, and his fingers found the activation switch. The blade hummed to life, glowing with an energy that made his skin tingle. The weapon was massive, designed for hands 10 times the size of his own. He could barely lift it, but he did not need to lift it far. Thane was focused entirely on, savoring his moment of victory. He never saw Danny coming. He never felt the small human running toward him on silent feet. He only felt the pain when Danny drove the energy blade into the back of his knee, the one spot Danny could reach, the one spot where the armor was thin. The giant screamed and collapsed. His raised blade missed by inches as he fell, crashing to the ground with enough force to knock Danny off his feet. But Danny did not let go of the weapon. He pulled it free and stabbed again, this time into Thane's other leg. Did not waste the opportunity. She surged up from the ground, grabbed Thane by the throat and slammed his head into the boulder beside them. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th strike he stopped moving. The forest went quiet. Danny lay on his back, gasping for breath, the giant weapon still clutched in his hands. Stood over Thane's unconscious body, swaying like a tree in a storm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then looked down at Danny, and her golden eyes were filled with something he had never seen in them before. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was wonder. "You attacked a warrior," she said. "You attacked Thane." "He was going to kill you," Danny replied. His voice was weak and every word hurt. Seemed like the thing to do. Let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "You are insane. You are completely insane." "Probably." She collapsed beside him, her strength finally giving out completely. They lay there together in the destroyed clearing, surrounded by fallen trees and unconscious giants, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. "The last warrior," said after a while. "The 6th one, I did not see him fall." Danny had forgotten about the 6th warrior. He tried to push himself up, but his body refused to cooperate. If another came for them now, they were both dead. But the attack never came. Instead, Danny heard the sound of a ship engine starting up somewhere in the distance. He heard the whine of thrusters and the rush of air as a vessel climbed into the sky. The 6th warrior was running. "He is fleeing," said. She sounded almost as surprised as Danny felt. "He is reporting back to the High Command." "Is that bad?" Turned her head to look at him. Her face was pale and blood was pooling beneath her, but there was a strange smile on her lips. "It depends," she said. "He will tell them that is protected by a human warrior who defeated 4 hunters alone. He will tell them that their best kill squad failed. He will tell them that coming after me means fighting something they do not understand." Danny closed his eyes. Good, let them think about that for a while. He felt Sm's massive hand come to rest gently near his body, her fingers creating a protective barrier around him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Danny Cole." He wanted to say something clever, something to break the tension. But the darkness was pulling him under, and the last thing he felt before unconsciousness took him was the warmth of her hand beside him and the strange certainty that everything had changed. 3 weeks passed after the battle, and the world changed around Danny's small cabin in ways he never could have predicted. He and healed together, though neither of them healed quickly. Danny had 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and more bruises than he could count. His wounds had reopened during the fight, and she had lost enough blood to kill a normal creature twice over, but neither of them was normal, and neither of them was willing to die. Danny rebuilt the shelter around the crashed ship, making it larger and sturdier so it could rest in comfort. She was too big to fit inside his cabin, but she did not seem to mind sleeping under the stars. He spent his days tending to her wounds and his nights sitting beside her, talking about anything and everything. She told him about the world she had seen, the battles she had fought, the strange and wonderful species that filled the galaxy. He told her about Earth, about its history and its people, about the small joys of life in the mountains. They learned each other's languages, each other's stories, each other's silences. By the end of the first week, could stand without help. By the end of the second week, she could walk. By the end of the third week, she was fully healed, standing at her full height of 32 feet and looking down at Danny with eyes that held something warm and unfamiliar. But their peaceful recovery did not go unnoticed. The 6th warrior had reported back to the High Command, just as had predicted. He told them about the human who had defeated their hunters. He told them about the traps and the courage and the impossible determination, and the galaxy listened. Ships began appearing in Earth's orbit on the second week. First came the vessels, a full battle fleet sent by the High Command to finish what Thane had started. They demanded that Earth surrender the traitor immediately or face consequences. But they were not alone. Other ships came too, from species Danny had never heard of. A peaceful race of scholars who had suffered under conquest for centuries. The fierce reptilian warriors who had lost there to aggression. The small creatures with vast intelligence who had been enslaved by the giants for generations. They all came to see if the rumors were true. They all came to meet the human who had done the impossible. By the third week, 12 different military forces had gathered in the space above Montana. Some wanted to kill, some wanted to protect her, some just wanted to witness whatever was about to happen. Earth's own military had surrounded Danny's mountain with soldiers and vehicles and more weapons than he could count. News drones circled overhead, broadcasting everything to a planet that watched in fascination and fear. Danny stood on his porch and looked at the chaos that had descended on his quiet life. Politicians had called demanding that he give up to prevent war. Military commanders had tried to order him to cooperate. Reporters had shouted questions from behind police lines. He had ignored them all. Emerged from her shelter and stood beside him, her shadow falling over the cabin like a protective blanket. "This is because of me," she said. Her voice was heavy with guilt. "All of this chaos, all of this danger, you should have let me die." Danny shook his head. Then none of those politicians and commanders and reporters would have anything interesting to talk about. We are doing them a favor, really. Let out a small laugh. How can you joke at a time like this? Because the alternative is crying, and I am too tired for that. Danny looked up at her. What do you want to do? This is your choice. I will support whatever you decide. Was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the ships in the sky, at the soldiers on the ground, at the small human who had saved her life and changed her understanding of everything. "I want to stand," she said finally. "I want to stand before all of them and show them what true honor looks like. I want to show them that strength is not about crushing others. It is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Danny nodded. Then let us go show them. They walked together toward the edge of the property, where the armies waited. Soldiers from a dozen species watched them approach. Weapons were raised. Commands were shouted. But Danny and kept walking until they stood at the center of it all, surrounded by enough firepower to destroy a small city. A voice boomed from above. A commander stood at the front of the Loyalist forces, his armor gleaming in the sunlight. By the authority of the High Command, you are sentenced to death for treason. Surrender now, or everyone around you will share your fate. Did not respond to him. Instead, she looked down at Danny. Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Then did something that made every present gasp in shock. She knelt. The greatest warriors in the galaxy did not kneel. It was not in their nature, not in their culture, not in their history. Or would rather die than lower themselves before another being. Yet here was decorated commander, feared warrior, kneeling before a human who barely came up to her knee. "Danny Cole," she said, and her voice carried across the mountain, amplified by the countless drones and devices recording every moment. "You saved my life when you had no reason to. You fought for me when you had no chance of winning. You showed me a kind of honor I had forgotten existed." She placed her hand over her heart, a gesture Danny had seen in her memories. It was the start of an ancient ritual, something no had performed in 10,000 years. "I speak the words of the life debt," continued. "My strength is your strength, my blade is your blade, my life is your life. Until my final breath I am bound to your service." She lowered her head. "Your command, Master." The world held its breath. Danny looked at the kneeling giant, at the armies watching, at a galaxy that would never be the same after this moment. He thought about everything that had happened, everything that had brought them here. Then he stepped forward and placed his small hand against hers. "Stand up," he said. His voice was soft, but in the silence everyone heard it. "My command is that you stand beside me, not behind me. We face whatever comes together as equals." He smiled. "And please stop calling me Master. My name is Danny." Raised her head, and there were tears in her golden eyes. She rose to her full height, towering over everyone present, and looked down at the human who had given her something no one else ever had. He had given her a choice. "Together then," she said, "as equals." The broadcast went out to every corner of the galaxy. A warrior had pledged herself to a human, not through conquest, not through fear, but through something far more powerful, through gratitude and respect, and a bond forged in blood and sacrifice. The political implications were enormous. The High Command demanded war. The refugee species offered alliance. Earth's government scrambled to understand what it all meant, but Danny and did not care about any of that. They turned their backs on the armies and the cameras and walked toward the cabin. "What happens now?" asked as they left the chaos behind. Danny shrugged. "I have no idea. We figure it out as we go." Smiled, and it transformed her face into something beautiful. "I can work with that." They reached the cabin just as the sun began to set over the mountains. Behind them, the armies were arguing about territory and treaties and the future of galactic relations. But in front of them was something simpler and far more important. A home. A friendship. A promise to face whatever came next side by side. Danny opened the door to his cabin and looked back at. "The couch is not big enough for you, but I can make some tea if you want to sit outside." Laughed, a real laugh that echoed across the valley. "Tea sounds perfect." And so they sat together as the stars came out, a giant and a human, a warrior and a healer, drinking tea and watching a galaxy try to make sense of what they had become. They did not have all the answers. They did not know what tomorrow would bring, but they had each other, and for now, that was enough. The story of Danny Cole and spread across the universe in the days that followed. It became a legend, a reminder that true strength was not measured in size or power. It was measured in the choices people made when everything was on the line. And sometimes, the smallest person could change everything just by doing what was right.